realize that most of my life has been spent helping people to deliver workshops. And I think for type practitioners, being able to deliver effective, interactive, engaging workshops is absolutely critical. So let me begin with a poll, and let's see if this poll works. It's a very simple poll, and it's simply going to be, I'm going to ask you a question. What type of learning activity do you like most? And it's on your screen now, so it's just one answer only, please. Lecture, reading, self-directed learning, group activities, or hands-on practice. Let's have a look and see what we tend to like. And it would be very interesting because type preferences obviously play a role here. And I'm pretty sure you'll know who's going to err on the side of which ones. So we're up to...
Susan, that's 25 of the 40 are coming through just now. So just over 65% have voted.
Perfect. Yeah, and Catherine says it's hard because she likes learning in general, no matter the modality. Exactly. So we've got probably, what, about 2/3 voted now, Chris? Should we wait just another few seconds?
Yep, you let me know. What's the magic number? We can always stop. If you want to stop at Pareto, 80%, happy to do it.
Or we're at 70%. Let's go with that.
I'm getting failed to submit poll error every time I try.
Well, thank you for trying, Jill. So we'll take that. So let's share the results then, Chris. That would be great.
Ending poll now, and the results should be on everyone's screen, hopefully now.
It's very interesting. So we've got 30% lecture, 24% reading self-directed learning, group activities 19%, and hands-on practice 27%.
We can't see the results.
Do you want to try, share the results? Let me try sharing results as well. We've had all issues with this. Failed to share poll. Yeah, I've got error 4402 again, Richard. Thank you for that. So
Susan, let me try stop sharing and share again. If it doesn't come up the second time, then most likely someone's got pop-up windows blocked on their system.
Okay.
I've shared again.
Yeah, we see it now.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so this is very different to how I normally, when we've done this with a general group, which area do you think comes up the highest normally?
Probably group and hands-on.
Group and hands-on, exactly. Why might be slightly different?
Why this would be different?
Yep.
Because we're a whole bunch of type freaks.
There's a lot more sensing people out there than there is here.
Yeah, and I think, yes, a lot more sensing preferences. So thanks for that. So there was a handout that came with that I sent. So now you see the way the virtual background doesn't work. So if you wanted to follow along, go ahead. Let's look at what we're going to review today. So we're going to look at how do we balance what people want to learn with how we deliver the message. And we're also going to look at psychological safety. How many of you have heard the concept psychological safety? Just so you can physically raise your hands. How many of you have heard that term recently? Very good. Yeah, Google have certainly got that in the common domain now. And I think that's a really important point as a facilitator. Then we're going to look at how to design active learning workshops, because if you don't design it actively, it won't be active. And I've developed a course methodology that initially I thought wasn't that significant, but I've heard from clients that they love it. So I'm going to share that. And then the final thing is, this is the real type specific piece, is I'm going to look at how do we have to vary our delivery and pace and style depending on the type of content? Because there may be, and we're going to use the interaction style framework here, because there may be an assumption that you need to use a certain type of energy when facilitating, and that isn't necessarily the case. So let's have an awareness discussion, because I'd like to just find out your ideas. And the question is, next click, is what do you think differentiates a facilitator from a teacher or presenter? And I would love it if you could put your ideas into chat for me, please. What do you think differentiates a facilitator from a teacher/presenter? Because we have to start with the big picture here. Just a few notes in chat.
What?
Thank you. A facilitator draws out what others know. A teacher or presenter imparts knowledge. Presenter is giving information, lecture generally. Thank you. Yes, enable people to have their opinions. Facilitator tries to get more engagement from the audience and draws out learning. Teachers provide information. These are great answers, by the way. An interesting statement. I always considered it a non-elitist stuff. And interesting comment, it can help a facilitator to not know stuff. Facilitator helps people work out for themselves. Teachers tell them what to think. Facilitator co-creates with the group the learning environment and draws out learning from others. A facilitator extracts and leads, T presents data. Really nice. So we've got some great themes coming out here, one-way versus two-way. We've got the audience owning a lot of the content. Let me carry on summing down. Facilitators in the same pace pulls knowledge for the group and connects it to all. Thank you. Yes, and I think that looking at the next slide, I think because I've tried to distill down 13 modules into an hour here for you, so we're picking up the key points. A facilitator really does use andragogy, and just give me a show of hands again. How many of you are familiar with the term andragogy? Just so a few, yeah, okay, which is an andragogy, obviously it comes from Latin and it's adult to adult versus pedagogy, which is parent to child. And so one of the key differences is that adult to adult, you're starting with the experience of the participants and what problem do they have to solve. And I'll be happy to share these slides afterwards with you. And so andragogy also works the way the brain works. The neuroscience shows us that there are sort of simplistically 4 stages where we have to gather data. Then we need to reflect. And andragogy and active learning allow people time to reflect. And it's only in reflection that they move from receivers of knowledge to creators of knowledge. So it's really important that we give the reflection and often questioning activities, etc., force a degree of reflection when individuals create their own meaning and then they actively test. So anything that we run has to follow some active learning principles, which I'll cover in a few moments. So that's why. And the other key thing I think is one of the areas that maybe people who've seen me before do know, but generally is not so well known, is the whole concept of task and group process. And the role of the facilitator is to manage both task and group process. And this comes from Bale's work on social emotional distinctions. How many of you have heard the term task and group process? I saw it came up in the, yes, Tim, Marquis. Anybody else heard the term task and group process? A few, yes, it's probably people I've rammed it down their throat. So the other element that differentiates a facilitator from a presenter or a teacher is a facilitator is constantly balancing where are we with task and group process. So task is what are we there to try and teach the participants? What is it that we start off in our heads, even if I interviewed people and said, this is what their challenges are, this is what we think will help with the challenges, that's what you're there to teach them. The group process is very much how do they go about internalizing that data? And that's a two-way journey. And presenting tends to be the sending part of the communication process. And group process tends to be the two-way, which most of you have talked about. So, and it's slightly different from team task and individual. So I would like to do a poll. Task is what? Group process is how. Let's see if we can make our final poll of the day work for you. So there's going to be 10 questions, and each Each of them has just one element, and all I want you to do is say, do you think that's a task element or a group process? And it's 10 questions, so what you'll have to do is slide the little grey bar down the side so you can see all 10 questions. So let's give you time to think about each of those items. Do you think they relate more to task or to group process? Okay. Doing very well so far. That's 4 people I see. And Chris, as you're hosting, feel free to add any content that you think might be relevant from the experience that we've been through running all these virtual workshops.
Yeah, no problem at all. I'm very impressed by how fast people answer in these sessions. It's remarkable.
Well, I think it's because we've been together now for sort of 4 hours or so, so I think we know each other and feel safe. All right. And this is a great example today, by the way, of a session that we were originally planning to do live, and how are we adapting it to do virtually.
Very nice.
And
Susan,
it does
that's 25 of the 40 are in so far after 1.5 minutes.
Okay. Let's just give it a couple more minutes, just a couple, well, not a couple more minutes, probably about another 15 seconds based on my in charge, yeah.
So you're the same here as you are everywhere else?
Yes, and Catherine, great comment. They're also hard. A few of them felt that they could be both. Yes, absolutely. I think there's an element of every item has an element of both. It's more related to one than the other. So thanks, that's a great. Yeah, so after 3, you have to scroll to the remaining 7. That's it. Yeah, yeah. And I think the discussion around that is interesting. Yeah, so let's share the results now then, Chris. I think we've sort of stuck here. So
Okay.
let's, yeah. Now this is 16 dark. Is everybody seeing it? Seeing the results? Thumbs up if you can see it. Perfect. All right. With one person seeing it, we know the whole group can see it. Great. So, okay, agenda primarily task, exercise setup primarily task, asking questions, yes, that's primarily task, signing down, models primarily, sorry, group process, models primarily task, yes, monitoring energy primarily group process, objectives task, getting group feedback, that was a clue in there, I think, group process, participating and having fun, group process, and timekeeping primarily task. Very nice. Yes, spot on, spot on. So let's look. Yes, so I gathered a few in this space to write this if you wanted to. The answers plus some additional examples are on the side. So if we look at our task, you've got most of them. I added some additional ones because polls only do 10. So knowledge transfer, the extent to which people are, it's gone from your head to their head, techniques, theories, instructions, and I put examples there, examples that you share as a facilitator. Why would I put examples primarily under task? This is when you're sharing examples, not stories, but examples with a group. Why would I put that primarily under task?
It seems like that's something that would often be prepared in advance. You want a specific example to cover it. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Sterling. And that's often a lot of the task elements are prepared in advance, which is a great observation. And also the example is there normally to cement and connect the theory with the practical application. So it helps more, I think, in the what people are trying to learn than in the how they're trying to learn. Now, any questions or comments about what's on the task list? No? And quite a few of you previously found the raise hands icon. That's a new icon that's just been added. So if you do have something to ask, I know Chris is going to be monitoring that. Let's look at the group process ones, which you've already got the first 5. And then I included managing challenging participants, guiding group discussions, observing exercises being conducted, not setting them up, processing participants' reactions. What do you think I mean by processing participants' reactions?
Helping them to sort of understand what's happening between each other and within themselves.
Thank you, Catherine. That's exactly right. Helping them to understand what's happening between each other and themselves. And facilitators tend to ask a question about that. What have you learned? I noticed that presenters or teachers tend to tell people what they've learned, which doesn't enable people to create their own meaning. So that's one of the reasons I put that there. And checking for understanding. And at any one time, the facilitator is having to say, am I looking at the task right now? Or am I needing to focus on the group process? And that's what makes, I remember years ago, my husband saying to me, and we have been married for 45 years now, by the way, I don't see you being a serious facilitator. So once he got up, he said, why? And he said, I think you'd get bored. And you never get bored because the task and group process are always totally different and unique. And this has helped to give a framework when we've been working with internal facilitators to just work out what you focus on first. So that's the sort of the key role about being a facilitator. Any questions or comments about that? So interesting, Catherine says, if you hadn't thought about process, Catherine Hirsch, you may set all of your objectives at the knowledge level and not include effective change or application. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Plus, you know, the key thing is people say, we don't have time for the group process. Well, if you don't do the group process, no one's going to learn anyway, so you've just wasted your time. So there's a technique that we've introduced about what they call must know, should know, could know, to prioritize the task element so that you have time for the group process element. So that's our first chunk. Then the next thing I want to look at is how are they? That's very interesting, Jane. Thank you for sharing that. Research on primary and secondary classrooms shows direct interaction is more effective than facilitation. However, the key researcher believes that this is because not enough planning goes into the classroom facilitation. Exactly right. It takes a lot of planning to make a workshop interactive and a lot of trust in the group. So what I'd like you to just share with me, what are some elements do you think of so we've looked at the role of the facilitator. Now we're on the second chunk. What do you think are the elements of a well-designed active learning workshop? Share some ideas with me. What do you think are the elements of a well-designed workshop?
Time to think as well as time to do.
Thank you very much, Chris. Time to think as well as time to do. How important is that, particularly for those, the behind the scenes or chart the course, who have a more introverting preference, so that they have a little bit more time to think? Yeah, good. What else?
Icebreaker early on that establishes trust.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Why would you say the icebreaker is so important at the beginning to establish trust? Why?
Because I think if people are sitting without actually having to say anything for a long time, they become reluctant to say anything and they don't really engage. So I think you need to get people saying something and doing something very early on in order to get that trust and that openness.
I totally agree. And I think in a live session, people often may bring their negative perceptions of what school has been like, because some people have had negative perceptions. In a virtual workshop, it's even more important to get people to speak or interact as quickly as possible, so that you're immediately saying this is going to be interactive and we're not going to go into presenter observer mode. Thank you. So we've got the icebreaker, we've got time for quiet. What else?
Make sure there's plenty of room to move. There's nothing worse than having to move chairs and tables out of the way to clear a space to do an activity and then move them back again afterwards.
Exactly. Thinking of that physical space. Thank you, Robin. What's going on where, and how are we going to do this? Have we got space to do this? Because anytime you have to do some of those logistical things, it messes the group process up, actually. So, and then you stop the learning journey. Yes. What else?
Simply enough time.
Say again, Catherine, sorry.
Simply having enough time to do what you set out to do. I think in the transfer from a lecture to a more active approach, people often underestimate how much time there needs to be to process what's going on in an activity and help people see why it's been done. They forget they need to wear both hats.
Exactly right. It's one of the biggest challenges, because moving, as you say, from a lecturer to a facilitator, it's easy to underestimate how much time you need to allow people to internalize so that they do create their own meaning, and making sure that there's a plan and enough time for that is important. Yes, sharing the agenda, specific questions ahead of time, I like that, so that people can think, clear objectives for each task. Thank you. Props necessary for fun and humor, yes. In moderation, if you have too many of our lovely improvisers in there, it could get totally disruptive, but fun as well. So, and that energy balance.
If I could add something here.
Please, go ahead.
I was just going to say that something I find is really powerful is people are making a choice or a decision, often with some kind of reflection, but a sense of agency and control in the outcome, I find is just hugely powerful in any kind of active learning.
And it's really, thank you, it's that sort of agency, that choice of outcome. And I'll show you at the end, I mean, from my perspective, the engagement skills of which I'm trying to use here, and you're really helping me. So thank you, which is questioning, listening, repeating, paraphrasing, follow-up questions. Those are the skills that enable people in the audience to feel that they're making a choice and they're creating their own meaning. So thank you for that, Sterling. So in the very simple terms, you've done lots of really deep terms. You know, we have I'm sure you've heard this, you've got to tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them you told them. So there's an introduction, a content, and a review. So those are the three chunks. So what I'm going to do just briefly is share with you an introduction structure, a design structure, and then we won't have time for the summary because I want to do a different activity. But I think the introduction and the main body are the key elements. So let's look, and it based on what Catherine Stothart said, actually, the structure of the introduction. I mean, Catherine already talked about an icebreaker. What else needs to be in an introduction, do you think? What elements should we include in an introduction? And it could be a one-day program. What sort of things should be in the introduction?
Creating some common ground among the participants.
Creating common ground. How do you do that, Marquis?
You might like sometimes I just ask questions for people to raise their hands to say, you know, how many of you have ever heard about type? Okay, how many of you have never heard of this? How many of you hope you wish you weren't here? You know, I put a little bit of humor in, but have people participate by saying, okay, now we understand the knowledge of the room. It helps the presenter, but it also helps the group know they're not alone. The individual know they're not alone.
Very nice. Common ground and show of hands is the safest way to participate. And it's also really effective within the first couple of minutes because you've got people physically active and yet they're not feeling vulnerable. So we've got common ground, some sort of show of hands. We've had icebreaker. What could or should
agreeing values.
Agreeing values, yes. Often we see the sort of ground rules or values, yeah. The objective,
yeah, exactly what we're going to accomplish. You know,
exactly.
Why are we doing this?
Yes, what on earth do we, yeah, why are we here, right? The objectives, the agenda, exactly. So, so we've got those elements, which I'm going to review in a moment, and also we need to think of how we sequence them. Now, what traditionally do we start off with in terms of the introduction? What do we tend to begin with? Our very first, when we stand up in front of the group and we say hello and welcome, and what do we say?
I'm
Our
table.
name.
We say a name, that's a good start. And yeah, what else often?
Housekeeping in case there's a fire.
What did you say, Valerie? Sorry, was it Valerie who said?
Housekeeping in case there's a fire. That's always the big thing.
Okay.
And also, why you're the expert they should listen to.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up, Chris, because I think if we think about task and group process, there can be a tendency to put the task elements first. Because we've got to tell them why we're there and we're doing our job, and then we've got to tell them the objectives and the agenda. Now, what happens if we just do task first and we don't create common ground, or we don't do an icebreaker? What happens if we haven't done any group process and we just do the task element?
People think, who are you?
They think, who are you?
People tune out.
Say again, Marky.
People tune out. They go, oh, blah,
tune
blah,
out.
blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. They tune out. So Chris, would you mind doing the next 2 clicks so I can, so we've used this approach, and it challenges, yeah, about one, yeah, we are. It challenges some assumptions, I think, and this is the approach we use globally, so it's worked culture-wise. Introduce self, and that looks like, hello, my name is. If you want them to know any more than that, send the bio in advance. They're the most important people in the room, you're not. I'm going to go very teachy just for a moment because of time. Then I do use this define the roles, and many of you have been in live workshops with me, and it's called the prisoner, vacationer, learner script. Just give me a show of hands. How many of you have heard me do prisoner, vacationer, learner? All right, I'll just talk it through briefly with you. There is a script. I start by saying we often observe there are 3 types of participants in the room, and this is a credit to a lady called Meg Ellis. This isn't my intellectual property. And they're called prisoners, vacationers, and learners. And then it's simply you ask 7 questions. What are prisoners thinking? And you allow the group to answer. What's the body language for prisoners? And you'll get people demonstrating. Then you'll say, what are vacationers thinking? And of course, that's called Club Ed, just to be on the safe side. What's vacationers' body language? What are learners thinking? And what's their body language? And the $6 million question, which is the 7th question, which group has the most fun? And actually, it's the learners. There's only been 2 events that I haven't used prisoner, vacationer, learner in a live session. And within 5 minutes, I turned to Chris and I said, should have used prisoner, vacationer, learner. What do you think that does for the group process? What's the benefit of prisoner, vacationer, learner, do you think?
They have a chance to choose their attitude.
They have a chance to choose their attitude. Absolutely right, Chris. What else? What's the other benefit? So many benefits of doing this.
And actually, I think it points out that some people are sort of, the people who look like they're cool and on vacation really aren't that cool. And I think in some ways it has them maybe sit up a little bit more and participate and realize, oh, she knows, she's on to me.
It does. It names the behavior. It shows that you as a facilitator are actually observing what's going on in the room. And if people feel, oh, I'm naming that it's okay to be one of those 3 categories, because maybe they haven't been told by their manager why on earth they're doing type. And maybe they are crazy busy and they can't afford to do this at this point in time. And for me, I found that I therefore don't do what Jerry talked about, which is values or ground rules per se, because in prisoner, vacation, learner, it sort of implies that we're going to participate, that we're going to write notes, that we're going to smile, that we're going to own our own attitude in terms of learning. So there's a lot of reasons for that. So that takes about 5 minutes maximum. And then we will always do some sort of icebreaker, which Catherine talked about, and then also think about asking participants for their expectations. Why do we want to ask participants for their expectations?
Make sure they're in the right workshop.
It really does. I mean, how many times have you've asked for expectation? It's like, actually, this isn't what this is about. Yeah,
and I
so
think it clarifies. Sometimes people say, you know, I was expecting to get, you know, a new insight into the meaning of the universe. And you're like, well, that's a great topic. We can talk about that at break. And you can redirect the energy or just let them know that's not the expectation that's realistic for this time.
Absolutely, and it sets the expectation. It increases ownership and interest. Thank you for all of these of you that are writing them in chat. Makes people feel engaged, and it also links directly to active learning, and andragogy, because you're asking people what they need to know. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, Susan, just come back to the icebreaker. I think also from my own learning, especially working with you know our core groups, 18 to 25-year-olds, at sometimes is that the icebreaker has to be relevant and relative to the content. It can't just be, you know, the big book of icebreakers and let's just blow up balloons or you know, do something weird. It has to be really relative to what the actual purpose and meaning of why we're here.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, the need to make it absolutely relevant so it leads into the content as much as possible. And then then you can link the objectives to individuals' expectations so they feel connected. And then you can do the agenda and maybe if there's some context setting around the subject. And I know for and I'm going to use words because I hate the preference letters, I'm sorry, for our guardians or our stabilizers who might say, well, you know, I want to know the agenda and objectives ahead of time, and you put it towards the end of a 40-minute introduction. What I'd say is, can you send those as pre-work or have it as a handout on the table or as a flip chart on the wall so that they've still got a clear picture of where they're going because otherwise they'll worry. I mean, because stabilizers might tend to worry. So make sure that we know where we're going. This is our journey. It's just because what that does, which elements of that introduction relate to the group process primarily? Which elements relate to looking at introduce self, define roles, expectations, objectives, agenda, which correlate with group process?
Not really sure what you're asking, Susan.
So out of that list of things in the introduction, which primarily relate to the group process element of training rather than task element of training?
I would say that they all relate to group process.
I would agree. I think the self, the roles, the icebreaker, the expectations are all primarily group process. Even when you link it to objectives, I think it pulls the group process in. And any context setting, ground rules and context setting, probably the only thing that's more clearly a task element is the agenda, which is one of the reasons we do want to have that sent out in advance or documented. So that's a structure. Any observations or comments? And I love what you said, Jill. It allows you as a facilitator to take on board and adapt your teaching learning session to allow them to get what they want out of it. Absolutely right. The amount of times we set up and we thought, well, this is the agenda, and then you think, actually, we need more time on this, less time on this because of expectations. Any questions or comments or observations about this introduction? I remember in one of the workshops that Chris and I ran together, one of the, it was another Chris who said, oh my goodness, he said, why do people always start with their CV at the beginning? And he said, it's not needed based on this premise. And I think it is a structure, Ian, I like that comment. It's quite a liberating structure. It is. Because if anyone who's nervous, all the energy initially is on the group, so it helps. So that's sort of the structure of the introduction. Now I'd like to introduce you, several of you may have seen this anyway, it's the course methodology I use to help, because if you don't design it interactively, you won't be able to make it interactive. So interaction and facilitation starts with great design, and I've realized doing all this work that I'm actually probably more of a course designer than I am a facilitator. I spend more time designing courses than I do facilitating, interestingly enough. So I use an acronym TEACH. And obviously we know why I'd use an acronym, because it's easy to remember. And it's a sort of a deceptive acronym, because I'm going to teach, but I'm going to show you how you teach interactively. So should it really be TEACH? But engage was too long, so I stuck with TEACH. And I had this, and I used this for years. And then I was doing my first train the trainer. Oh, and I had a highly cynical group in the room. I don't know if you've ever had those sorts of groups. And they were like, oh, who's this woman and what's she doing? And why she designed the course this way? And then I sort of said, well, it sort of follows TEACH. So let me just share that. And it was, that's great. Show me it again. So that's why it's now the anchor that I use. So let's just talk you through it. And it is in the handout too, if you wanted to make notes, and you'll need the handout in a couple of minutes anyway. So the T is you state the topic, which is literally just saying we're going to talk about design now. And sometimes people use a hook to pull things in, so it could be a video or a quiz. Then the next step is you want to engage the audience. Now, why do you want to engage the audience before you share any content that you have, all your lovely concepts, theories, skills, models, theories, techniques? Why do you want to engage the audience first before you start introducing a lot of this content?
To ground what you're about to say in something they've already experienced, or they're already thinking about, or is relevant to where they are and what they're doing, so that it doesn't feel removed, but synergistic with where they are.
Thank you, Jerry. Yes, you're sort of grounding it in their reality or their problem to solve, or you're trying to find out what they know about it already. And I had someone only last week who said, okay, so what this does is it opens the brain. It opens the brain and goes, okay, I'm in my past experience, I'm in my present. Now, what are you going to introduce to me that will help me? So I love the open the brain statement, and that could be an activity, or it could be a series of questions either. Then we're sharing the abstract data. So that's our sort of knowledge, our skills, our techniques, our process, our theory, our models. And that's why, you know, sometimes you have to fiddle around with the acronym to make it work. So abstract information, people say, what does it mean? Well, I've tried to give you a few examples there. Then the next thing we want to do, and I think most of us do this pretty well, is we want to give some sort of concrete application. So some opportunity to practice whatever we've introduced, because that activates in the learning cycle, that gives an opportunity to do active testing. And then the final letter of TEACH, again, I had to be creative with the acronym. The H is how am I going to apply the information? So it's the call to action for each individual. How are you going to apply this concept? What does this mean to you? So that's the broad structure of TEACH. And it seems really straightforward, and it's very easy to teach to others. Any observations or comments on TEACH? Any comments or observations?
Since I first came across this through you, Susan, I use this all the time when I'm designing courses. I think I was probably doing it anyway, but having that acronym really makes me do it.
And that's a great point you brought up, Catherine. Most people, when I look through courses that are designed, it's been done unconsciously. What this does, I think, absolutely, is formalize it and make it a little bit more tangible and able to be replicated. So thank you, excellent. And the other reason to use TEACH is it helps the energy flow between the facilitator and the audience, because as you know, in today's world, we need to keep people active to facilitate learning. So when we state the topic, I think we can safely say the energy is with the facilitator. So where do you think the energy goes when you engage the audience? Where's the energy when you engage the audience? You can do it with your hands if you want to show me, or do that or that. Where does the energy?
To the audience.
To the audience, thank you. Over it goes to the audience, thank you. And then when you're sharing the abstract information, where do you think the energy goes?
Well, the pattern makes me think it goes back to the task, and you're going to go across.
Thank you, Chris. There is a logic here. Yeah, now, and actually, there's a lot of ways you can make abstract data more concrete with things like jigsaw learning, read and teach, card activities. And yet, primarily, this is when the facilitator, I think, is guiding the content more closely because they want to make sure the content is clearly understood. Yes, and then when we do concrete applications, you can just build it now, I think, Chris. I think people see where it's going. It goes to the audience again, and then it carries on down to the individual. So you're going from group process to what am I going to do differently, which is when active learning and andragogy kicks in. So by using this methodology, firstly, it makes design more cohesive, and also it creates that back and flow energy. I've been helping another client with course design, and the step that is primarily missed is the E, the engage. And once you put the engage in, then the abstract data looks very different. Yeah, Chris, go ahead.
Just to share with the group, as Susan mentioned, we this year have taken 100 trainers through this process, and what's really, really helpful for new facilitators is if you design with Teach, you can actually almost feel if you've missed a stage when you do the delivery part. So if you go from stating the topic straight into some abstract model, concept or theory, you can literally feel the group dynamics, or you can observe the group dynamics. Something hasn't, and then if that's not a once-off program, if you're really looking at it from a sustainable perspective, if this is going to be an evergreen module that you're constantly evolving, then that then circles back to the design process. So it's not so much a linear process, but more cyclical. So it's really, really helpful for both design and delivery. They work in unison.
It is, and the question came up is, why is E usually missed? And I think it's often because people are coming from this is what I want to teach perspective versus what do people need to learn and how can I help them learn? So I want to do a quick activity because I've stated the topic, I've engaged the audience, I've given you the abstract models, and I'm going to give you a concrete application. I've got to practice my own principles here. And this is in the participant guide on page 5. It looks like, even though the page numbers are all over the place, but the page has got this on it. So it looks like key. And what I'd like you to think about, and we can probably do this in chat, which number represents the T, which number represents the E, which number represents the A, which number represents the C, and which number represents the H.
Susan, it's page 3.
It's page 3, thank you. Thanks, Catherine. And if you want to put it in chat, that works. Or if someone wants to give it a go, it's how I might. It's just an element of part of what I teach when I am teaching interaction styles. What do you think the topic or the hook might be? What number?
Four.
Quote, yes, it is. Thank you very much. Yes, it's so that's just a high level. Why on earth are we doing this? So often there's a quote on difficulties of interacting with different people and challenges of conflict. Excellent. What do you think might be the engage the audience? And sometimes the E and the C are hard because they're both audience activities. They can get confused. So which do you think might be the E?
3.
The engage.
5.
It is 5, actually. It is. I mean, there's a lot of activities in there, isn't there? So this is a sort of very high level awareness exercise. So engagement is often the awareness exercise.
I remember it's more or less the first thing you did when you first taught us interaction styles.
It is. It is. It's a sort of trying to look at a behavior and then going back to try and find out what the underlying drive is underneath that. Great. And then which do you think was the abstract data? And anyone who's been with me knows how what I use for abstract data for most of the time.
1.
One, thank you. Card activity rather than me lecturing about interaction styles. We've got some cards that represent certain key behaviors and people sort the cards. Cards work for all types. They work for all 4 temperaments and they are a fabulous active learning tool. Exactly, and then, so exactly then we've got, which do you think is the concrete application? Which is normally a little bit more in depth and more practical.
2.
2, thank you. And then yes, select best fit would be number 3. So next, so hard to do that, I think, because there's a high level of information. It just shows the flow. T, hook, engage is often a higher level or might be shorter type activity. Concrete application tends to be more in depth and more specific or more practical. And if we can make the abstract information interactive, so much the better. They haven't worked out how to do drag and drop on Zoom yet, which is a shame, but once they learn how to do that, I will give them lots of kudos. So that's how we design it. Now what I'd like to spend some time in is how we deliver it. Now just give me a show of hands quickly. How many of you are familiar with interaction style? I know a lot of you are. Okay, wonderful. For those of you who are not, the correlation between our type and our interaction style is there. So there are the 4 interaction styles: in charge, get things going, behind the scenes, and chart the course. So just have a look because you're going to be going into a group in a few moments. Anne, you raised your hand. Anne Marsden, you raised your hand?
Yes, I did. Just saying, no, just that I'm familiar with what you've done.
Perfect.
Sorry, I was a bit late on finding the right buttons.
Don't worry.
Interrupted by a phone call.
Don't you hate that real world interruption? Yes. Perfect. Thank you, Anne. So just in the next visual, it's just got a high level and it's also in your participant guide, therefore it must be on page 4, just some key elements of each of the interaction styles. There we are. So just a little bit of the theme for them. So in charge has a straightforward communication style, determined energy and fast pace, get things going is more persuasive, engaging energy, energetic pace. Behind the scenes, obviously approachable energy, considered pace and an unassuming style, and chart the course as a focused energy, measured pace, and a more formal communication style. So that just gives you a few tips to look at. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide you into 4 teams, and I think they're going to be pretty large teams. And I'm going to allocate each team an interaction style. Now, I think Chris is going to help me here because this was beyond my level of competence with breakout rooms. He is going to put the name of the breakout room. So what I'd ask you to do is, if it says in charge, I want you to think about 2 specific examples when you think in charge might be the appropriate energy when facilitating learning. If you've got chart the course, same thing. When do you think chart the course is a really valuable style to adapt? Because we can use all 4 energies. Same for get things going, same for behind the scenes. And as I say, you lose the slide when you go into the breakout room, but it is set up in your participant guide here. So if you've got the handout, the instructions are in there as well. So any questions on the activity?
Susan, we're going to need about 60 seconds. So if you want to ask questions, do any clarification, that would be great. And then I'll be back with you. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So any sort of questions or thoughts on, when I described the interaction style, which interaction style do you think is often most associated with being a great facilitator? Any thoughts? Out of in charge, get things going.
Get things going.
Yes, thank you, Marquis. There's that sort of, oh yes, let's do you've got to be get things going. And in effect, get things going is great. And there are times when each of us needs to put on the different energies in order to make sure that the group process works for the content that we're trying to facilitate.
I think that the Get Things Going often show up as what we consider the natural facilitators, because they're really in the process and the flow, and their energy is very, very physically engaging in that way. And so we often think of that as the stereotypical facilitator, particularly the ENFP, which are a lot of consultants and trainers who, get everybody up hopping on one foot and doing those sorts of things.
And it's interesting, we won't be able to discuss in detail now, but Ian was sort of saying he's not sure, and he thinks we can flex. I think though the stereotype of the facilitator is to get things going. I agree.
There's research they're most likely to be named Teacher of the Year.
Really?
Yeah. There were some studies.
Say it again, Jane, what?
They're most likely to be voted Teacher of the Year, especially the ENFPs. Because they're so visible, playing guitar in the hallway and all those kinds of, the Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society.
Yeah, yeah.
So the stereotype is absolutely right.
Right, so let's go into rooms. I'm only going to give you 4 minutes here because I've got to allow time to sort of a quick report out and a summary. So, and we need to chart the course to have the flow. We need all 4, we certainly do. So if you head to your breakout rooms.
Yep. Just before everyone heads to the breakout rooms, when you're in the breakout rooms, it may take a couple of seconds to get there. If you look up to your scroll bar with your icons, you'll see the actual name on the grayscale, so you'll see the different interaction styles.
Great, thanks, Chris. Yeah, off they go. There's a few people that have not been going into rooms, although
that's because they're dialing in by phone.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've not got any unassigned other than yourself, so the other ones might be just a phone one. The automatic assignment wasn't working there, so I had to put in everyone manually. That's why I asked for seconds.
Crazy.
So I'm just going to pause the recording now.
I think we're back up there, so we can start recording it again now.
Yeah,
we're back.
Okay.
Perfect. So for the in charge group, what were a couple of ideas when you thought that the in charge energy was appropriate? What did you think? Who's going to report out for the in charge group?
We didn't really agree to who would do it, so I'll just say 2 things that we discussed, which was when you want them to do something.
Yeah.
And bringing a discussion to a close rather than letting it drag on.
Very nice. I'll send you a hand up. I picked out just 2 quick things that I thought, yes, I thought sort of, if you can click on, Chris, that'd be lovely. Important to be used in the background to keep moving towards a goal. But you're right, bringing something to a discussion, so getting some closure there. I'll send you, I created a list of 5 areas where each of the interaction styles is valid. So I'll send that out. I took it out of the participant guide because it would have made the exercise redundant. So I'll send it as a handout. Thank you for that. What about our chart the course? What were 2 times when we thought we should use chart the course? Who was in that group and who'd be willing to share?
One of the things we came up with was that it applies a lot to especially the early part where you're going through, here's the objectives, here's the ground rules, here's the process. That sense of measured, focused energy felt really appropriate to in that context.
Really nice, absolutely right. Let's look at the objectives, let's look at the content, really important. And the other elements, I think, which is where often people whose natural energies get things going might struggle, is in setting up activities. This is what we're going to be doing. These are the steps. Let's prime the pump. Let's get an example to make sure we're doing it right. Everybody set, and have it in multiple places so that people understand what they're supposed to be doing. Really nice. Thank you. Now, what about get things going? What about get things going? Who was it in the get things going group?
Arga, can you take
Thank
that?
you, Graham.
Hi. Get things going. Call for action, as in desire to change in business,
Yeah.
and problem solving because there's many possibilities.
Yeah, so that's pretty much many possibilities, call for action. So that's very much the get things going energy. I also think it's wonderful at the beginning. I mean, really, when you're trying to establish that safe group process, get everybody engaged, there you are. And keep it, if the energy is going down, being able to pull people in and naturally know what to engage, not necessarily by energy, but by involvement. Really nice. And then let's look at the get things going, but the behind the scenes. I thought that was really, I mean, Catherine, I'd like you to share at the end too, but who was in the behind the scenes group who'd like to share some ideas? Who was in the behind the scenes group, when you might use that?
I can do that if you'd like.
Yes, please. Thank you, Shauna.
Okay. So behind the scenes, one participant mentioned that during the exercises, it's a good time to kind of fall behind the scenes and just let the group evolve or kind of come up with their ideas. And then also when a lot of sorting out is going on, so maybe a new concept's there and there's just some sorting out, you can just step back and let it observe and let it evolve. And then nice. Another idea was even if you're being a bit of a mediator.
Excellent ideas, yes, and it's sort of counterintuitive, really, and yet the behind the scenes has the unique gift of being able to those who have that natural energy, being able to step back and let the group learn what they need to when they need to. So, loved your ideas, yes, and when there's content that needs to be explored, sometimes in a team building session, when there's elements that need to be discussed. I mean, we see it sometimes when we're looking at the flexing interaction style exercises in a team, that really surfaces some interesting discussions. So what was our learning point from that activity? What's our learning point from that activity?
It's about learning how to flex, you know, to understand that we all have our natural style we start with, and then there's a, you know, being able to adapt our style as a facilitator. You know, I always am going to start with in charge, but if I've thought through the process and really designed the training, then I'm naturally using those pieces. And then, actually in some ways, the design of the training tells me which mode to be moving into as I naturally move through it.
Absolutely. So the design sort of drives and the need to flex all for work. And sometimes it's great to have a co-facilitator because they'll be able to guide you. So this is a visual I'm just coming up with, really, which is, obviously it comes from it's not in Flawless Facilitation, it's emerged as a result of writing the book and doing all this work, is we're hoping to help people move from what can I teach participants to how can I help participants learn. And I've got this sort of upside down pyramid. So when I'm doing trainer, I get people to rank themselves where we are on that spectrum. And then design using teach forces engagement, the engagement skills which I've been using in this large group, in which Zoom facilitates. The other virtual learning platforms do not facilitate it in the same way. You can have a large group discussion using questioning, listening, repeating, and very similar to a live workshop. Activities, yes. Any support materials such as slides, visuals, flip charts, handouts. And I view the least important thing as presentation skills. And so it's where are we and where is our energy focused? And if we focus on those top 3 elements of the pyramid, we will unconsciously move across to the right-hand side. So there's just I'll ask you to think separately, or if you want to put yourself in chat, what have been your key insights from Flawless Facilitation? Would love some ideas. While you're putting that in, we can put the final slide in, which is, most of you know me, Flawless Facilitation. I finally finished last year. We put it on hold while our son-in-law had leukemia, and I was able to pick it up, and it picked it up at just the right time. So it's got all of this, and it's got 2 really meaty chapters on type and training, and it covers the how do adults learn, active learning principles, engagement skills and activities, presentation skills, dealing with challenging situations. Well, anything that you've ever wanted is in that book, really. So yeah, I can't wait to do in-person facilitation again too.
And you also have an e-learning book as well. It's also on Amazon, so you don't need to. You can go digital.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think that, you know, one of the pieces that's so important for all of us as any kind of facilitator, trainer, whatever we want to call ourselves, is that taking the time, which often seems like an extraordinary amount of time to do the planning, to put together your slides, to really think through your process, think through your exercises. When I work with people who are new to facilitating and teaching, they always feel like, oh, shouldn't I just do a few slides and get it? No, it's like, no, actually do the time with your slides, because they will bring you through the entire process. If you do that, you don't have to work so hard in the workshop.
And I think it's equally important for virtual workshops, because I worked with a client, they said, oh, well, and this is before I worked with Chris, oh, well, you know, you've got the live workshop. What's the difference virtually? It is night and day virtually. You have to make much more conscious thought on how can you try and keep people engaged, and how do you make it interactive. You can still use the engagement skills as long as you've got the tiles like this, but what activities can work and how do you adjust the activities? Our funniest moment was doing jigsaw learning virtually. It's about the only time the four of us ever got near to a misunderstanding. I don't know if any of you have done jigsaw learning, but it's quite hard to explain, but you can do it virtually. You can do it virtually. So any other, thank you. Yeah, 8 hours, that's a good statistic. 8 hours, Chris, of design for 1 hour of delivery. Yeah, not including the graphic design. So wonderful. I think we can stop recording now. Thank you very much for your time. As Chris will be sending out an evaluation